all ages today, comes from the African country of Sudan. The story, Generosity Bends the Road, a tale from Sudan, retold by Faye Morganson, based on the original from Ali Lufti Abdallah, The Clever Sheik of Butana and Other Stories, Sudanese Folktales. About 200 years ago in Sudan, a man named Attai lived far off in the countryside, just a little bit south of Brookhaven. He lived there with his wife and his 7 sons and his 9 daughters, their wives and their husbands, plus 63 grandchildren. The family, all by itself, was an entire village. Life was good for Attai and all his offspring. They were able to grow or hunt the food they needed. The water in the river was plentiful and clean, and they were able to have enough wood. There were trees, and there was enough wood to build and heat their homes. Now and then, they traveled the long road into the city to trade their goods for treats like sugar or cloth. But mostly, they stayed home and enjoyed life. Then, one day, the village was situated far from the caravan road, and visitors were rare. But one day, a caravan of 12 merchants lost their way. Many days passed as the merchants wandered about. The forest was dense. I'm not quite sure where the forest is in Sudan, but it was dense, and they were really lost. They grew increasingly worried. Finally, one morning, the merchants woke to the sound of roosters crowing. It was some distance, but it was music to their ears. They saddled up their camels as quickly as they could. By the time they mounted, they could hear the faint sounds of dogs barking. It was more music. They moved towards the sounds. By sunrise, they could see faint lines of smoke just rising in the sky. It could only be a village. When at last they arrived in the village, they were met by several young people, just like you all, who smiled and welcomed them warmly. They guided the merchants to a yard where they were offered their camels grass, grain, and water. The merchants were then welcomed by an elderly man. Any idea who? None other than Attai, who welcomed them and invited them to stay for several days until they and their camels were well rested. When at last the merchants were ready to resume their journey, Attai invited them to return and bring other guests with them. They offered Attai gifts, but he refused. The name Attai means giver, and it was his honor and privilege to be able to host the merchants. The merchants, in turn, were appreciative of the fine treatment they had received from Attai and his family. As they continued their travels, they spoke highly of the experience and remembered the standing invitation to return. And within 1 year, they had returned with more men. Their reception was as warm and as generous as it had been the first time. After that, stories of Attai and his family spread like fire in dry grass. Everyone traveling along the caravan road turned off to visit. Year after year, more and more people came. Finally, the stream of visitors was so frequent that the route to Attai's village became more visible and distinct than the main caravan road itself. The former route had all but disappeared. The village of Atay came to be the most important station along the caravan route. All who stopped by were served the same generosity as the first visiting merchants. All the food and supplies they needed, a room to sleep, and care for their camels were provided at no cost. Atay came to be called Awak Adarib, the one who has bent the road. His story is shared to this day in Sudan. The Sudanese continue to offer the same kind of generosity to strangers. I wonder how many roads have been bent in this way and whether we might bend a road ourselves.